welcome back. It is time once again for not out of the tunnel, Blitz Boys on Jack Wagon Sports. Out of the tunnel will be on Saturday. We hope you guys join us for that live stream Saturday
Pumped.
morning, 9 a.m. Make sure you guys tune in for that. We also have Landon hanging out with us here. You're going to hear him in the background. He might even make an appearance. We'll have to wait to see. It is the final season preview to get us ready for the 2023-2024 college football season. We got to break down the SEC. There's a lot to talk about here. We're also going to be giving you our top 25 before the season starts, so make sure you guys check that out as well. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. A lot to talk about today, starting with probably the biggest question in the SEC. Can anybody challenge or even top University of Georgia this season? Back-to-back national champions. They have not won back-to-back SEC titles. Is it looking like that's going to happen this season, or do you have somebody else taking that crown from them this year, Slade? Who do you got?
Yeah, I think that I don't know that necessarily anyone is going to take the crown from them. I think that if there's someone that's able to go up and challenge them in a regular season game, I think that it would be Alabama, but they're not playing them in the regular season this year.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the SEC championship is where they're both predicted to end up based on their schedules so far. And so I think that Alabama has the best chance. Just based on the position that they're in right now. I mean, they're kind of struggling at quarterback position. I think he's ranked 10th in the SEC going into the season. Nick Saban's team, I mean, they're talking about, is the dynasty over? Like, should Nick Saban still be the coach at Alabama? Is I think what Paul Feinbaum said. I think that they're in a position that they want to be in. Nobody's looking at Alabama right now. They're expecting them to go out and probably have kind of close to a Penn State season and like a 3-loss season, which isn't normal for Alabama, 5 years ago. So I think that while I don't think that anyone is going to challenge them in terms of playoffs, I think that if there is someone that is able to beat them, it would be Alabama. It would have to be an SEC championship, but then I would see them losing to them in the playoffs later on.
Yeah. So I have two teams I'm looking at that can challenge Georgia. One of them is LSU. Again, they won't meet until the SEC championship game. If both teams make it there.
Mm-hmm.
As far as in the regular season, the only team I see challenging Georgia is Tennessee, and that's mainly because it's a road game. Obviously, Tennessee has a lot of questions around them. Some people are questioning Joe Milton. People forget Joe Milton was the original starter at Tennessee 2 years ago. Before he got hurt, that's when, oh my God, Hendon Hooker came in, and then Hendon Hooker played until he got hurt, and then we saw Joe Milton back. And so I think Tennessee's offense is in good hands with him. Obviously, they have a lot of questions
They
about
also have that
Jalen
great
Tyler.
backup.
Yeah,
The guy that he was the first like high schooler to play in a bowl game or something like that. He like graduated early.
Yeah. So I mean, there's still plenty of questions around Tennessee, but if I'm looking at Georgia, I mean, Stetson Bennett moves on. He's getting replaced by Carson Beck. I don't have huge expectations of Carson Beck, but Georgia seems like a program that they can take just about anybody, plug them in at quarterback, and they're going to do fine. I'm not expecting Carson Beck to compete for the Heisman, but he might do just enough. But if I look at their defensive side of the ball, Nolan Smith, Bear Alexander, and Jalen Carter are all gone now. They have departed Georgia, and that's where my question in lies for that Georgia team. And we're going to talk about Alabama in a little bit. You can't lose talent at that level, and they've lost it back-to-back years now. I don't think you can lose talent at that level. And yes, you can get replacements, but it takes time for those replacements to get up to that caliber. So I can see Georgia taking. I don't want to say a step. I don't see them losing 2-3 games again just because of their schedule. I could see Georgia absolutely, possibly dropping in that game on the road to Tennessee, still making the SEC championship game. But I think LSU is one of a team in the SEC nobody's really looking at. Everybody's still looking at Georgia and Alabama. Tennessee or LSU did great things last year, especially after coming off that Week 1 loss to Florida State. They lost by one. So I have LSU being the team if they were to meet in the SEC championship. I think that's who is challenging Georgia and Tennessee in the regular season. Moving on, we're going to talk about, excuse me, if Vanderbilt had a pretty good season by their standards. They went 5-7 last year. Obviously, they missed a bowl game, but compared to the Vanderbilt teams we've seen in the past, only winning two 3 games in a good season, for them to get 5 wins, is it possible that they can continue an upward trajectory? Can they make a bowl game this year? What are your thoughts on that question, Slade?
Yeah. So I think that they're able to flip their record from last year. You said they went 5-7. I could see them realistically getting to 7-5 this season and trying to really compete for that bowl eligibility. I think that they're going to have a hot start to the season just based on their schedule, you know. But the last 5 weeks of the season, I think, are going to be difficult for them in that they play Georgia, Ole Miss, Auburn, South Carolina, and Tennessee. I
Mhm.
mean, if they're able to go 2-3 in those games, I feel like that's just a win in itself for them and where their program's at. I honestly see them going 1-4 against those 5 teams, but I mean, I think that if they're able to start the season out hot and then possibly go 2-3 against those teams, I think that that definitely solidifies them into the bowl eligibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, Clark Lay is doing a fantastic job. He just signed a huge contract extension in the offseason to stay at Vanderbilt. So he's doing a very good job of building a program there, and that's what Vanderbilt has been lacking for a very long time. And so he's finally building that program out, and they're getting solid recruits in. They're not losing a bunch of people every year to the transfer portal. They did lose some big names this year in the transfer portal. They lost Mike Wright at QB and Ray Davis at running back. Um, Davis transfers to Kentucky. Wright transfers to Mississippi State. But I still feel like they have a solid enough team there that they should be fine. Like you said, we look at their first 6 games. They have Hawaii, Alabama, A&M, Wake Forest, UNLV, Kentucky, and Missouri. I think 4 of those first 6 games are winnable. From there, they need to win 2 more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like you said, they have Florida, Georgia, Ole Miss, Auburn, South Carolina, and Tennessee in that back half. Um, they beat Florida last year. Now this is going to be a different team. This is also going to be in the swamp, which no matter what Florida is playing like, it's always a difficult environment to go into. Georgia is going to be Georgia. Um, but I definitely think if they can continue to play as well as they did at times last year, I think the South Carolina game, they lost that by 11 points last year. Missouri, they lost by 3, but they also upset a ranked Kentucky team at the time. I think Kentucky's going to be a lot better this year, though, and I'm going to talk about
Mm-hmm.
them here in a little bit. Um, I think they can definitely squeak 2 possible wins if you know. And this is just saying that they only win 4 out of those first 6. Wake Forest is going to be a great game to watch. I think that's a toss-up game. I think with Wake Forest has lost and neither replace, and like I said, as good of a program as Vanderbilt is building, that's going to be a very fun game to watch. I think it's going to be a close game. So there's a lot of possibilities. I have them going 6-6. I don't have them going crazy 7-8
Mm-hmm.
wins yet. It's possible, but I think a realistic expectation is to just get to 6 wins and then
Mm-hmm.
make a bowl game. And I think from there again they're going to continue to build that out to be a solid program. I don't think we'll ever see Vanderbilt competing to win the SEC, but they can absolutely become like a middle tier team, middle to top tier team. Kind of up there around the likes of Ole Miss, Mississippi State, those kind of schools. So I think Vanderbilt's on an upward trajectory, and it's very fun to see. I hope continued success for them because it makes the SEC more entertaining
Mm-hmm.
when you don't have one school only winning 2 games every year. Um, Next thing we're going to talk about is Texas A&M. I made my opinions very well known on them last week when I saw them in the AP Top 25 poll. Still upset about that. But regardless, year in, year out, we talk about how well Jimbo Fisher's recruiting and all these 5 stars that he has coming in. Um, they pull off, it seems, to be one or 2 big wins this season, but they really struggle against some of these other opponents. I don't think I know they didn't make a bowl game last year. I can't remember if they made one the year before or not. Actually, I think they did. Regardless, um, do you think Texas A&M is this finally the year Jimbo Fisher can put it all together? Can they have a big breakthrough? Can they compete in the SEC West, not just the SEC? Next year we're going to talk about we're getting rid of divisions. There's not going to be any divisions
Mm-hmm.
left in the SEC, but um, are they going to be able to compete in the SEC West this year, or are we still kind of expecting a middle to lower end team here? 5-7 last year as well. Just your thoughts on Texas A&M heading into 2023.
Yeah, I think that they continue to struggle. I think that, like you said, they struggle with opponents. They kind of play down to their
Mhm.
opponents if they're like the stellar team in terms of recruits and the coaching staff and everything. And then they kind of play right up to the level of these teams that are at the same level or better. There's really no middle ground for them. And I think that the fact that the second half of their season is kind of jam-packed with some tough competition in terms of SEC play, I think that they're just going to have so many close games that there is the capability for a team each season to play a lot of close games and come out on top of those games and have the season that they want to have. I don't think that Texas A&M is going to be that team this year. I think that they're going to come out on the wrong side of a lot of close games. There's going to be a lot of last 2-minute plays of the game that they're going to wish that they could have back at the end of the season, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Texas A&M can at least make a bowl game this year. I mean, looking at their schedule, 5 of the first 6 games that they have this year are at home. One of those is technically a neutral site game. It's still in Texas. They play Arkansas at Jerry World. Their lone road game is at Miami, a rematch from last year where they had that close win at home. You look at the second half, though, they're at Tennessee, at LSU, at Ole Miss, and they have South Carolina at home. Those are 4 very difficult games in my eyes. A lot of the other big news that everybody's looking at and kind of pointing out is what might help Texas A&M turn the tables this year is bringing in Bobby Petrino as the offensive coordinator. Again, Jimbo Fisher said at SEC Media Days, he's not the lone play caller. We're kind of gonna go back and forth with each other, so that doesn't give me confidence right away. And also, let's look at Bobby Petrino's coaching record here. He left Louisville, went to the Atlanta Falcons. Was terrible with the Falcons. He lasted 1 season there, gets fired, goes to Arkansas, was pretty solid at Arkansas, and then he was sleeping with his assistant, and they got into a motorcycle wreck. Takes 2 years off, goes to Western Kentucky, goes from Western Kentucky back to Louisville, has 4 not great years. Well, he had 2 great years in there, but then so he gets fired from Louisville, takes a couple years off, goes to Missouri State. So he's coming from Missouri State to Texas A&M. I just don't have the greatest faith in him, and I've made my comments known about Jimbo Fisher and his 2014 stale offense that he refuses to update in any way, shape, or form. I think they make a bowl game at least this season. They pull off, they seem to be good for 1 or 2 upsets. Alabama at Texas A&M those 2 teams always play each other really close. That's going to be fun to watch. But yeah, I'm not expecting them to be competing for the SEC West, let alone any kind of ground in the SEC yet. So those are my thoughts on Texas A&M and how they will do this season. Let's look. There's a lot of quarterback changes at a lot of big teams in the SEC this year. Alabama, Florida. Let me pull up the list here. We had Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida. Already kind of talked about Tennessee's quarterback and a little bit about Carson Beck at Georgia. Of those 4, who do you think is going to have the toughest adjustment period team-wise and also just quarterback-wise in the SEC, also college football as a whole? But out of those 4 that I just mentioned, who do you think has the toughest road ahead of them this season?
I think it's Alabama. I think that they're going to have there's so many names in the room right now. I mean, they had Tyler, how do you say his last name?
Buckner, I think.
Buckner from Notre Dame come over. They don't know if Tommy Rees brought him over to start as an insurance policy. They also have Ty Simpson. Jalen Milroy Milroy, whatever. He looks like the guy that's gonna start week 1, but it seems like whenever Alabama doesn't have that set starter, that guy that Nick Saban's like, nope, this is going to be our guy. He's going to start the season, A.J. McCarron, whoever it's been recently. I think that it kind of draws questions. I mean, if they start out the season and, let's just look at their first couple games here of the season. They're going to start with Texas, Ole Miss in the first 4 weeks. So, I think that if they go out against Middle Tennessee and Milrow or whatever, he starts and has a great game, and then he goes out in the first quarter against Texas and throws 2 picks, I don't see him playing anymore that game. And then the next guy, if that guy comes out, has a stellar game, Simpson, it's just I think it's going to be a rotating room, and I just think it's going to be hard for the team itself to kind of center itself around one guy and kind of believe in that one person, especially because they're all kind of different in that Milroe is kind of like a dual threat. He's a passer, he's a runner. He's not great at passing, as great, I should say, as Simpson. So then when Simpson comes out, he's not really going to roll out of the pocket at all. He's either throwing or handing the ball off. And so I think it's going to be really hard for the team to kind of get rolling with one specific person if they have the jumbling carousel of quarterbacks the first 4 weeks.
Yeah. If I look at Alabama, I absolutely start Jalen Milroe. I don't look at Tyler Buchner. He sucked at Notre Dame, then he got hurt, and then we didn't see him again because Drew Pine came in and he looks so much better. I also look at, if I'm Tommy Rees, if I'm Alabama Holes and I'm looking at Tommy Rees, I think I said this last year when the move was announced that he was getting hired at Alabama. They ranked Notre Dame under Tommy Rees ranked 98th in passing offense, 60th in total offense. That's not going to cut it at Alabama. I don't think he's going to improve at Alabama, even with all these other star players and all this other stuff. I think that the biggest struggle though in the quarterback department this year is going to be at Florida. Florida, I understand Anthony Richardson was beyond talented and he's very athletic. He wasn't a great quarterback, and I made this comment when he got drafted, like 5th or 6th overall. Are we really buying into this much hype out of Anthony Richardson? Everybody's like, yeah, he's going to be great. Hasn't looked stellar in his preseason games, but again, it's preseason. He's still trying to learn it. I'll give him time at Indianapolis. Regardless, Florida just seems to struggle with quarterbacks lately. I don't think they've had a good quarterback since Tim Tebow. And now you have Graham Mertz transferring in. He was not great at Wisconsin. Wisconsin's offense sucked last year. And that's why their head coach got fired. In his career at Wisconsin, he's thrown 38 touchdowns and 26 interceptions. That's not a great ratio. Florida has also lost their best wide receiver and their guard. So that Florida offense, I really feel like is going to be a big time struggle this year. I don't have Florida making a bowl game. I don't have high expectations for that Florida team as a whole. And again, Graham Mertz being their quarterback doesn't give me a lot of faith in that offensive scheme. Whereas Alabama, I feel like just has more playmakers. They're able to spread the ball. Still have my concerns about them, and they bring in uber talented kids there. And at the end of the day, they have enough talent to make up for a lack of coaching on the offensive side of the ball. So that's why I'm a little bit more worried about Florida and Graham Mertz as compared to the quarterback carousel at Alabama. While we're talking of changes, we're going to look at coaches. There's 2 new head coaches coming in. Hugh Freeze is going to Auburn, and I don't want to mess up his name. He took over last year. We have Arnett at Mississippi State taking over for Mike Leach. Who do you have with a more difficult path to rebuild their team going forward? Looking at their schedule, who they brought in, and so on, who has a more uphill climb to get the team, and they don't necessarily have to get to the top of the SEC, but to be competing in SEC this year.
Yeah, so I think that this season I kind of looked at it as in who I believe is gonna finish higher in the SEC West in terms of that, and so I went with Auburn here. I think that they're going to have a tough 4 weeks kind of right at the first third of the season. They play Texas A&M, Georgia, LSU, and Ole Miss back-to-back, all of them right in a row. And then they play Mississippi State right after that. I think they're going to be looking for something to prove against Mississippi State, and I think that they're going to be able to go in and get a win there, and then that'll kind of kickstart the rest of their season for them. I mean, they do finish the season out against Alabama, but I don't think that they're looking for anything shy of, like some stellar upset when it comes to that last game of the season for them. I think that they're just kind of try and build after the Ole Miss game. I mean, look, they could have a good game against Texas A&M and even Ole Miss and possibly get some really close games there, possibly squeak a win out against one of those 2 teams. But I think when you look at Mississippi State and they play LSU, South Carolina, Bama, then they play Auburn, and then they finish the season out with their tougher opponents, Texas A&M and Ole Miss. I just think that in terms of the way the seasons go for each team, I think it's going to be a slight advantage to Auburn this year.
All right, so yeah, as you can see, Landon has decided to join us, but back to your point, Slade, I 100% agree with you. I think Auburn definitely has the rougher season ahead of them. You look at Mississippi State, while it is a brand new head coach, and a lot of these guys have been promoted, this staff has been together for a few years now, and I think that helps a lot. It's not a brand new staff. You're having to kind of piece guys together. They've kept the majority of the staff that was under Mike Leach. Um, I think if anything, this is going to be a far more balanced team. Listen, I love Mike Leach's offense. I love the air raid style, but Mississippi State has absolutely been lacking, kind of a 1-2 punch with passing and rushing. Um, they've been very heavy on passing, and we can see where that gets them in the trouble in games. So I think with a more balanced attack on offense, that's going to help that team a lot more. I think they're also going to have a very strong defense this year, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch both sides of the ball for Mississippi State. You look back at Auburn. Tank Bigsby is gone. So is TJ Fenley from quarterback. He wasn't a great quarterback still. He was there, and he's been your starter for the past 2 years now, I think. You look at who they brought in the transfer portal. They got Peyton Thorne from Michigan State. Not a name that I'm excited about to watch be an SEC quarterback. 19 touchdowns to 11 interceptions last season. And then, like you said, they have a very rough schedule. They're at Cal, at Texas A&M, home against Georgia, at LSU, home against Ole Miss, at Arkansas, and home against Bama. So there's a lot of questions on the offensive side of the ball for this team. And I think, like you said, it's going to be a tougher struggle for Auburn as compared to Ole Miss, and that's why I have a little bit more faith in Mississippi State under Arnett in his first year as compared to Hugh Freeze. So let's go ahead and get into some of our predictions for the SEC this year. First up, who do you have as your most improved team in the SEC?
Most improved, I'm going to go with Vanderbilt. I mean, we talked about them. I think that they're able to flip the script on last season. I think that if they're able to go 7-5, make a bowl game, I think that's a big turnaround for them. I mean, seeing as though I think they were last in the SEC East last year at 5-7. So just to be able to flip that would put them right around the same areas where I think South Carolina is going to finish. I think that somewhere around the 4-5 slot. And so I think that that's a big turnaround for a team, like you had said, that has had a lot of trouble kind of capitalizing on seasons these last couple of years.
Yeah, I went with Kentucky. I mean, I understand Kentucky had not a terrible season last year. I really think that they're taking a step forward. Will Levis is a horrible quarterback. I don't understand why anybody thought that he was Heisman material before the season last year. He played like absolute crap all year. Really cost them a majority of their games. If it wasn't for the rushing attack, I don't think Kentucky would have been a 500 team.
Mm-hmm.
So Devin Leary is coming in from North Carolina State. Did a lot of great things there when he could stay healthy. I think Kentucky is a better team up front on the offensive line to protect him. And again, they bring a great 1-2 punch, and I think Devin Leary is a far better quarterback than Will Levis. So I think Kentucky can get to a 10-win season. Who knows? Maybe they can pull off an upset against Tennessee, sneak one out against Georgia, or at least keep it close. And if calamity happens in front of them with Georgia and Tennessee, maybe we see them in Atlanta this fall. I doubt it. I don't think Georgia and Tennessee are going to be that rough. But I have Kentucky, being the number 3 team and a very competitive number 3 team. So I have Kentucky being my most improved team. Who do you have as your most declined or disappointing team in the SEC this year?
I'm going with Mississippi State here. I think they went 9-4 last year. I think it's going to be a kind of a turnover season for them. And just like I had said, I think that they're going to get slightly outplayed in terms of the season by Auburn. And I think that that's going to kind of put them at like 5th in the West. And so I just think that that's a big decrease from last year, where I think they ended up 3rd on that side of the SEC.
Yeah. My most, I looked at it again as a disappointing team. I don't think anybody's going to have a huge drop off from last year. I'm going with Alabama. Again, they lost a ton of talent. They lost a Heisman quarterback. Jahmyr Gibbs was one of the best running backs in the nation last year. If you look at that Tennessee game, the back and forth game, without Gibbs, that looks like a blowout completely the other way. And then you also lose Will Anderson Jr., who was a top 10 draft. Actually, I think he might have fallen to. I can't remember now, but high draft pick, one of the best defensive players. As a defensive player, he was getting talked about for Heisman possibilities throughout the season. Um, I Again, I understand Alabama and Nick Saban is one of the best recruiters in the country, and he brings in high-end talent. There's a lot of questions around the quarterback, like we just talked about. It's hard to replace a former Heisman winning quarterback. It's hard to replace offensive and defensive production like this year in, year out. I just don't see enough there for them to step up that quickly. I'm not saying Alabama's going to suck. I don't see them losing more than 3 games still. But I just think it's disappointing, I'm concerned about where they go. I don't agree with Paul Feinbaum. Nick Saban's still one of the best coaches. This isn't hurting his legacy. You don't win that many national championships and hurt your legacy by having back-to-back 3-loss seasons or missing the playoffs. And who knows? With all the crap that everybody's out there talking about them, it might fire them up enough, and they might go on a tear, go undefeated, and win the national championship again. I'm not trying to talk crap on Nick Saban. He's a coaching idol of mine. I'm concerned about the level of talent that they lost and that they're trying to replace.
I did want to bring up something about Alabama and obviously I think as a university, as a football team, they will find it if what you think, if they have the troubles, if they kind of have that disappointing season that you kind of think they might run into. I wonder if it's the opposite and they really go on a tear and say they upset Georgia in the SEC championship and stuff. What else will they be able to say? Because they already, from my knowledge, Alabama is one of the only SEC schools that is not actively looking for NIL deals for their players. Nick Saban said that he refuses to pay any player to come to his school, that if you want to come and play for him, you'll come and play for him, but it will not be because the car dealership down the road wants to give you a supercar or something like that for you to play at Alabama. That's not the reason you're going to come there. And so I think that that'll just add to his legacy if this year or even next year, if he's able to really pull off a big win against these teams that are heavily recruiting with the NIL deals, like we had talked about, Tennessee, Georgia, these top teams. Also, do you think with you predicting them to be a disappointing season for them this year, will you still be rooting for them on week 2 against Texas?
Listen, being disappointing in the SEC is a lot different than being disappointing across the country.
Do you think that they could lose every game the rest of the season as long as they win like 49-0 against Texas week 2? You would change
I'll still be happy. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. I still think just again that talent is there. But you also got to think about what the other teams in the SEC are bringing in talent-wise, what LSU is returning. That game, I forget what week that's going to be.
Which one? LSU, Alabama?
Yeah, LSU, Alabama is...
It's going to be week 8. 9.
I think it's 9.
I'm off. Yeah, 2, 4, 6,
probably 10. I
9.
think there's a bye week for that.
10. Right.
November 4th is when they play. That is going to be the game to watch this season. Because again, by that point, Alabama's going to have their team developed. They're going to be rolling.
And they're coming off a bye week in between that.
Yeah, and the week before that, they play Tennessee. So, that game is going to be a lot of fun to watch. I think the winner of that wins the SEC West. I think that's what we're looking at with that matchup. With that being in Alabama, that might be helpful, especially with they want revenge for how the game ended last year, losing in overtime. On that 2-point conversion. They're going to be hungry to go out there and beat that LSU team. So that's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
It's going to be a huge game. They both come off a bye.
Yeah. So looking at the SEC as a whole, who do you have walking out of Atlanta? First of all, tell me this. Who do you have playing in Atlanta first? And then who do you have winning the SEC championship?
Yeah, so completely agree with you in that I think that it's going to come down to what's wrong.
The headline says SEC most champion prediction.
Well. I completely agree with you in that. I think that it's going to come down to LSU and Alabama and who gets to go and face Georgia. I think that Georgia is just a mastermind the last couple of years in how they've been able to really top Alabama in just about every category. I think that whoever wins that game is going to really just kind of be prepping for that SEC championship against Georgia. I still don't think that either of these teams will be able to challenge Georgia. I think that Georgia is going to make a lot of teams that like Tennessee, Alabama, or LSU, whichever one they end up facing in the SEC championship. I think that the first half is going to be games where Georgia comes out and they kind of get to see what the other team is going to do. They're going to stick with them. And then in the second half, they're going to come out and their defense is going to shut the other team out, and they're going to score 3 touchdowns and win by 3 scores and make it look like it was never close in the first half, which is something that Alabama was able to do for years, in that they would come out against these teams and they would go into halftime 14-14 and they'd end up winning the game like 41-14.
Yeah.
So I just think that's where Georgia's going to be this season. And so I don't know who between Alabama and LSU is going to play them, but I don't think it's going to matter at the end of the season.
Yeah, I'm going with LSU making it out of the West, and they're going to play Georgia, and I have LSU beating Georgia in the SEC championship game this year. It's a rematch from last year. LSU put up more of a fight than I thought they would in that game. They were coming off a loss against Texas A&M, and I really didn't have high hopes. They definitely struggled, and Georgia, I don't think was sweating it, but LSU definitely put up more of a fight than I thought they would. And I think with what they're returning this year, Jaden Daniels is absolutely a Heisman candidate in my eyes. And for me, it just comes down to, again, I worry about the amount of talent that Georgia lost and replaced. And now you're putting, a high pressure situation on a quarterback in Carson Beck, who isn't proven in these situations. Yeah, he's gotten to play. He definitely got some time in the national championship game, but by that point, the game was decided. The game wasn't put on his shoulders. And so for that reason, I'm going to take LSU in the SEC championship game. I think both teams, especially with LSU winning, I think the SEC is sending 2 schools to the playoff. But we're going to talk all about our playoff predictions on Saturday. Yeah, so that'll do it for the SEC preview. Thank you guys, as always, so much for checking us out. Week 0, Out of the Tunnel, will be live Saturday morning, 9 a.m. here, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So if you guys want to check that out, we'd really appreciate it. We have our first special guest host. Landon might even make an appearance.
Second, yeah. Landon's our first, but
Rico knows. He's pretty big on TikTok and as well as YouTube. Makes a lot of great football content across the board. He does NFL, college. He even talks a little high school football. So we're excited to have him on, and we're gonna have an interview with him, and he's gonna make some guest picks as well. It's gonna be a lot of fun. So make sure you guys are there Saturday morning, 9 a.m. We'll see you then. Have a great rest of your week.